She has never known anything but winter and survival. Hisoria is a shifter of the free lands, born to hunt, raised to endure. In her world, mercy is a weakness, attachment is a liability, until she hears it. A thin, desperate cry swallowed by the storm. A baby. Alone in the snow, fighting the cold with a strength far too small for this world. Hisoria knows what saving the child will cost her. Her tribe will cast her out. Her mate will reject their bond. She lifts the baby anyway. Every warrior she has ever stood beside watches her walk into the blizzard without a word. She expects hunger, exile, death. She does not expect him. A wolf gone feral. An apex predator so feared that royal guards hunt him in packs and still fail. A creature of teeth and instinct and wilderness. He could end her where she stands. Instead, he spares her. And then he returns. Now wild green eyes follow her from the tree line. Now the most dangerous beast in the region refuses to leave her side. And his scent is wrong. Because it smells like the child she found in the snow. Chapter 1. The deer was gone. Hisoria crouched in the snow and pressed 2 fingers into the last track, a clean hoof print, already softening at the edges as fresh powder. She had followed this animal for 2 hours through cold so sharp it had stopped feeling like cold 20 minutes ago and started feeling like nothing at all. And now the trail was dissolving in front of her eyes, swallowed by the blizzard. The wind hit her face, and she turned into it out of habit, reading it the way her father had taught her. Direction, temperature, what it carried. What it carried tonight was more snow, and a lot of it. She needed to turn back. She knew this and took 1 step toward camp. And then the wind shifted, and underneath it, so faint she almost convinced herself it was nothing, came a sound, high and thin and desperate. She stopped. What was that? An animal? The wind playing tricks? Then it came again, and her body moved before her mind finished arguing. Not toward camp, towards the noise, down the ravine. She didn't decide to go. She simply went. She smelled death before she saw it. The woman was face down. Hisoria approached carefully, hand moving to the knife at her hip out of habit, though there was no threat here. She crouched. The woman's cloak was wrong, too fine for the wilds, and the woman's hands were frozen into claws, her fingernails cracked. She had run. She had run for a very long time, and then she had curled herself around a bundle pressed against her chest and used the last of everything she had to keep it warm. The bundle was crying. Hisoria unwrapped the frozen fingers carefully. The cloth made her pause, embroidered, wrapped around a pendant bearing a crest she didn't recognize. Inside was a baby. Tiny. So desperately, terrifyingly tiny that Isoria's first instinct was that it couldn't be real, that nothing alive could be so small and still be alive. Its face was scrunched tight with the effort of screaming, mouth open wide, eyes squeezed shut, every feature it had gathered into one furious, exhausted, heartbreaking demand to be heard. It hadn't given up. That was the thing that hit Hisoria like a fist. This child had no understanding of how badly the odds were stacked against it, and so it was fighting. Screaming into the blizzard with everything it had, as though the world owed it an answer. "I hear you," Hisoria said quietly. The baby didn't stop crying. "You're all right." She stopped, looked at the tiny chest heaving with effort. "You're not all right," she murmured. "But I've got you now." She held it against her chest and tucked it inside her furs. She made herself think. The tribe's stores had been cut twice this moon. Chief Brander had stood before them all 3 weeks ago and said the words no chief wanted to say. No new births until the thaw. No new mouths to feed not one. The vote had been unanimous. Even Isoria had raised her hand, because this was how survival worked. You made the brutal calculation. She knew what the brutal calculation said about this baby. Her tiny mouth was still open, still screaming, but the sound was weakening. It was still fighting. It just had less and less left to fight with. "Put it down," the sensible part of her said. "You know what Brander will say. You know what Kale will say." Then the baby's hand escaped the wrapping. 5 fingers. each one the size of a pine needle. They reached into the open air, grasping at nothing, finding nothing, and kept reaching anyway. That same refusal, that same furious, ignorant insistence that the world must have something to offer. Isoria held out her finger. The tiny hand closed around it. "All right," she said. "All right, little one. I've got you." She stood up with the baby pressed hard against her, to the pendant in the cloak. It was not a feeling she had words for because she had never felt it before, ancient and without logic. This child was hers to protect, that was all. It was as she turned to go that something caught her eye, a flash of white against the gray rock of the ravine wall. A single flower growing from a crack in the frozen stone, a winter glory. Isoria looked down at the small face nestled against her chest. "Flori," she said. The name arrived whole and certain. "Your name is Flori." Chapter 2. Isoria caught the camp's scent before she saw the light, felt the pack bond hum to life in her chest as she crossed into range. She had made it. Old Halda was the first to see her. The tribe's healer was crossing between shelters with a bundle of dried herbs tucked under one arm. Then her eyes found the bundle against Isoria's chest, and she went the color of old ash. "Isoria." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" Isoria didn't answer. Cale was outside their shelter, sharpening a blade. "Come inside," he said when he saw the bundle. "Now." Their shelter was small and functional. 2 bedrolls, a fire pit, a rack of weapons along one wall. Isoria had always found it sufficient. Standing in it now with Flori against her chest, it felt suddenly like a cage. "I found her in the blizzard," she told Kyle. She told him everything. She laid it all out plainly, the way she always spoke, without decoration. When she finished, there was a silence. "And you brought it back," he said. Isoria kept her face still. "She was dying," she argued. "Then you should have left her." Carl said it without heat. "You know the chief's ruling, Isoria. No new mouths." "I know, Kale, but she was a newborn in a blizzard." "And the tribe is starving," he interrupted. He looked at Flori with that flat, assessing look he used on wounded animals. Not malicious, just measuring. "Take it back," he declared. Isoria shook her head. "I can't do that. She'd die." "Yes," he met her eyes. "That is how it works. You know this." She did know it. She had always known it. The brutal arithmetic of survival. And yet standing here now with Flori's small warmth against the fur, she found that knowing a thing in the abstract and being asked to enact it on a specific small face were entirely different things. "I am not taking her back," she said. Kale's jaw tightened. "We have been told we cannot have children," he said coldly. "And you would throw everything away for a stranger's foundling?" He turned. "Be reasonable, Isoria. Leave it in the snow. It will be fast in this cold. The child won't suffer long." The words settled over the shelter like a killing frost. Isoria looked at him, at his face, entirely convinced of its own kindness. She looked at Flori. Flori, who at that moment chose to make a sound. A small, wondering sound, not a cry. The sound of something noticing warmth for the first time and not yet knowing what to make of it. Her mouth opened slightly, purely instinctive, turning toward the nearest source of light and heat. She was so new, a life that had been in the world for mere days, that had no knowledge of cold logic or tribal law. Isoria thought of her crying into the dark, of that tiny hand reaching into empty air and finding nothing and still reaching. "I can't," she said simply. Kale studied her for a moment. "Then let me do it," he offered softly. "You won't have to see it. I'll take it outside and it will be over in a moment." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Isoria had ever heard. She looked at this man she had shared a shelter with for 3 years. He was offering her a kindness. He believed that. "Don't touch her," she said. "Don't you dare come near her." Chief Brannar summoned her within the hour. She heard his runner's heartbeat before the boy even reached the shelter, and she knew what was coming before he spoke. She wrapped Flori tight against her chest and went. The central fire was burning high. The whole tribe gathered around it. 30-odd wolves, lit amber and shadow, their collective scent rising with the heat. She knew each of them before she even saw their faces. She had bled for these people. She had hungered for them, gone without so they could have more. Not one of them would look at her. Branner stood at the head of the fire. He delivered the ultimatum without anger, which was worse. "Leave the child with Halda," he said. "She will see to it." "You mean put her back in the snow," Isoria said. "If you're asking me to let her die, look me in the eye and say so." A murmur moved around the fire, low and uneasy. "I am asking you to choose your pack," the Alpha said, his gaze hardened. "As you have always chosen your pack. Refuse, and you are no longer a part of it." She looked around the fire, face by face. She looked for one, just one, who might open their mouth, who might say, "Wait." She has earned more than this. Somewhere in the back of her mind, humiliatingly, she was still looking for Cale. Still waiting for the moment he pushed through the circle and said, "Enough. I stand with my mate." But at the far edge of the circle, Cale stood with his arms folded and his gaze fixed on the ground. He did not look up. She felt the pack bond in her chest, 30 lives, warm and present, the web she had been woven into since birth. As a wolf, it was not a small thing. Then she looked at Florrie and thought of Cale's face when he made his offer and thought, "If this is what we are, I want to be something else." "Then I leave," she said. She packed in silence. Furs, the best ones, bow and full quiver, both knives, the dried meat that was hers by right of her kills, a fire kit. Cale was watching her with that unreadable face she had spent 3 years trying to read. "You could come," she said. Not a plea, an offer, clear-eyed, final. He shook his head. "I will not die in the snow for a child that isn't mine." She looked at him for a long moment. At the face she had woken beside for 3 years. "I suppose it was never really a mating," she said. "Just an arrangement." She walked out. The sentries opened the gate without a word, and Isoria walked through. The gate swung shut behind her. Chapter 3. Isoria stood very still in the cold dark beyond the wall. She felt the pack bond stretch thin, the warmth of 30 lives bleeding away behind that wall, until there was nothing but the absence of it, a silence inside her chest where something living had been. She was alone, entirely alone in a way wolves were not built to be. But there was simply no time to dwell on it, because a small face turned up toward hers in the darkness. Florrie was awake, burrowing toward warmth, the cold already reaching them both. She was utterly without recourse if Isoria failed her, and the odds were, by any rational measure, terrible. There was no plan, no tribe, only a blizzard thinning at the edges of the dark and a woman alone in it with a newborn. There was also no choice. So Isoria pulled Florrie tighter against her chest, tucked the furs more firmly around the small head, and started walking. She followed the valley's fall, letting the terrain shelter her from the worst of the wind, while the blizzard spent its anger against the ridge above. Every 100 paces she pressed her hand flat over the small back strapped against her chest, and felt for the rise and fall of breathing. She walked through the night. Stopping meant cold, and Florrie was already making the sounds that came before real crying. She found shelter as the light came up, a granite outcrop where the cliff face jutted out far enough to block the wind, creating a shallow overhang maybe 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide. She packed pine boughs against the back wall until they were dense enough to hold warmth, draped her oilcloth over the top, and crawled inside with Florrie and pulled every fur over them both. The little one burst into tears. Because there was a problem Isoria had been not thinking about for 4 hours, as she could not solve it while walking and she could not stop walking. But as the gray light of dawn began to seep into the sky, there was no denying it anymore. Florrie needed milk, and Isoria had none. She knew the theory, had seen nursing mothers in the tribe, and knew that the wolf inside her made her body adaptable in ways a purely human one wouldn't be. But knowing this and producing milk on command in the frozen wilderness were entirely different things. "I know," Isoria said. "I'm working on it." She held Florrie against her and tried. It hurt in a way she hadn't anticipated, her body protesting this demand it hadn't been prepared for. There was nothing she could feel responding, yet Florrie nursed with determined, furious concentration anyway. "Come on," Isoria told her body. "You know what she needs. Figure it out." Florrie eventually tired and slept, and Isoria couldn't tell if that was because she'd gotten something, or simply because she'd exhausted herself trying. That was the worst of it, not knowing. When it was light enough to move safely, she stripped, wrapped Florrie in her clothes, and shifted. The wolf's nose gave her the valley in layers, pine and frost, deer trails threading northwest, no predators in immediate range, and, most importantly, no pack. The absence hit differently in wolf form, the silence where the bond should be, but she pushed it away and concentrated. She was back by Florrie's side within 10 minutes. What she had learned, water nearby, game present, no immediate threats. Enough. The first real crisis came that night. The temperature dropped in a way the pine boughs and firs couldn't fully answer. Florrie woke and cried endlessly, and Isoria tried to nurse her again and again in the dark, still unable to tell what was happening. She made a decision. She set Florrie in the center of the pine bough bed, wrapped in every fur, stripped quickly and shifted. She circled once, twice, reading the small scent, milk and warmth and something underneath that made the wolf pause and scent again. Then she lay down against Florrie's side, curved around her, and stilled. Florrie went quiet almost immediately. Isoria had expected crying. Instead, Florrie made a soft, considering sound and pressed against the warmth of the wolf's flank with the comfortable confidence of an animal that has found its pack. Isoria, the wolf, stayed very still and thought about that. Most shifter children didn't manifest their wolves until 5 or 6 years old, sometimes later. But there were things that couldn't be fully hidden even in a child too young to shift. A tolerance for cold that outlasted what any human infant should manage, a scent that carried something layered beneath the newborn smell. Isoria had been too exhausted to examine it closely, but lying in the dark now, Florrie tucked warm against her side, she let herself acknowledge what she had been sensing since the ravine. This child was a shifter. Which meant the dead woman in the hollow had carried her for miles in a killing blizzard, and she had survived it for reasons that went beyond luck and fine cloth. Isoria lay beside her and listened to the wind outside. Their odds had just improved. The nursing was still the problem that sat at the center of everything and refused to resolve. She tried every few hours, because Florrie asked every few hours with non-negotiable insistence, and she talked to her because talking seemed to help. "I don't know if this is working," she told Florrie on the second afternoon. "I think something's happening. I can't tell." Florrie nursed and frowned with enormous seriousness. That night, Isoria shifted again and curved around Florrie in the dark, and Florrie slept against her wolf's flank. It was a peculiar thing, Isoria thought, to feel less alone in wolf form, when in wolf form the absence of her pack should have been loudest. But Florrie slept against her side and breathed with steady ease, and the wolf felt it. This was her pup. The morning of the third day, Isoria was reaching for Florrie to nurse when she felt a subtle change. The faint, unmistakable sensation of her body responding. Florrie nursed and did not cry when it was over. Isoria sat with her in the furs and said nothing for a long time. "All right," she said finally. "We're going to be all right." Chapter 4. She found it on the 4th day out from the overhang. Old timber, cold ash, the specific damp rot of a structure the forest had begun quietly digesting. It sat at the edge of a small valley where the frozen creek widened into a flat, sheltered from the northern wind, surrounded on 3 sides by dense pine. The roof had caved on the east side. The door hung from one hinge, but the walls were solid timber, old growth, and the hearth was intact. Close to water, sheltered, defensible. It would do. She went back for Florrie. She lived in the western half, crowded against the hearth, and worked on everything else in whatever hours the baby and the hunting and the cold allowed. She patched the caved roof with pine boughs and bark and packed snow. She rehung the door with leather hinges cut from her pack strap. The fire she kept burning constantly, If it went out with Florrie in the cabin, they had hours, and she woke twice each night to stoke it. She set snares on the second morning and caught a rabbit by afternoon. She held it a moment before she cleaned it, and something in her chest that had been very tightly wound loosened by one careful degree. The nursing was steadier now, better each day. She talked to Florrie while it happened, not baby talk, but real talk. "Fox track," she said one morning on the creek bank. "Not wolf. Foxes step lighter, place their feet more precisely. Wolves are heavier through the heel." Florrie made a sound against her back. "You'll learn. You have time." And one evening by the fire, "Your mother loved you enough to run until she had nothing left." That's what I know about her. The boots worn through, the hands. I'm going to try to be worth what she gave. What she did not say was the other thing, the cold, specific ache that had nothing to do with temperature. She had broken a mating bond and walked away from a pack bond in the same night. She would catch herself listening for the warm, wordless hum of 30 heartbeats and find nothing. She had seen what simultaneous bond breaks did to lone wolves, read it in the hollowness behind their eyes. It was simply a wound, and wounds required management. Her management was this: she worked. There was a bad night in the second week. She came back from the snares after dark to find Florrie feverish, not fretful warm, but genuinely hot, her crying carrying a note of exhausted misery. Isoria went back out in the dark for willow bark from the stand east along the creek. She chewed it to paste by the fire and applied it to the small forehead, the inside of the wrists, the soles of the feet. But she did not sleep. The fever broke by the following evening. She sat afterward with Florrie in her lap, both of them hollowed out, watching the small sleeping face, color returning, chest rising and falling with easy regularity. She pressed her hand over that small chest, and Florrie chose this moment to find a strand of copper hair and put it immediately in her mouth. "That is not food," Isoria said. Her voice came out rougher than intended. Florrie held on. The weeks accumulated. The cabin changed around her in increments. Roof sealed, door true, drying racks full, wood piled deep. And together, the changes added up to something she recognized as a home. Florrie changed too. Dark hair thickening into soft curls, eyes sharpening, reaching deliberately for whatever was nearest. When Isoria spoke, she turned toward it with an expression that was, unmistakably, trust. Complete, uncomplicated, apparently unconditional. Isoria found this, privately, the most alarming thing that had happened since the ravine. One evening near the end of the 6th week, she sat in the doorway with Florrie in her lap, watching the sky go orange and deep purple behind the pines. Smoke rose straight from the chimney. The pack bond's absence was still there, the ghost of 30 lives, thinner now but present. She was learning to carry it. Florrie grabbed her finger and held on with her whole small fist. "We are going to be fine," Isoria said. She wasn't sure when it had shifted, from something she was telling herself to something she actually believed. Florrie grabbed her nose and smiled. Chapter 5. Florrie had been talking for the better part of an hour. Not words. She was 6 months old, but sounds of deeply opinionated commentary delivered to the trees, to Isoria's left ear, and occasionally to a crow that had been following them along the path. "Crow," Isoria said. Florrie responded with something emphatic. "Learn to read them. They'll tell you when something's moving in the trees before your nose does." Florrie grabbed her braid and held on. The settlement appeared through the trees, a muddy square with a general store, a tavern, and a cluster of homes. Petra's trading post occupied the largest building on the east side, smoke rising from the chimney. She heard Petra's children before she reached the door. She pushed it open and the warmth hit her like a wall. Wood smoke and dried herbs, and the lived-in heat of a building full of people. "There she is," Petra said, already coming around the counter with her arms open toward Florrie. "She's fine where she is," Isoria said. "She's been strapped to your chest for an hour. Come here, little love." She carried Florrie to the back room where her own children were. "Fox and Rabbit, and Mink?" Petra asked when she returned. 2 mink. The creek's running better. What else? Whetstone, dried grain. And Florrie's wanting more than milk, something she can manage. Petra looked at her with that warm expression Isoria never quite knew what to do with. Dried oats, boiled soft. She'll make a mess. She pulled things from the shelves. I also need to check the general store. They had steel snare wire last month. Go now, before Hank locks up for the afternoon. Isoria went back out into the cold. The square was quiet. Not the usual quiet of a slow afternoon, but the particular silence of a place that had recently been busier and had stopped. A woman was crossing toward the tavern and changed direction suddenly, moving fast, head down. 2 men near the well were talking in low, urgent voices, and as Isoria watched, one of them grabbed the other's arm and they went inside. Isoria frowned and stopped walking. Her nose found it before her eyes did. A scent carried on the cold air from the direction of the eastern alley, something wild and enormous, something that made the wolf in her go very still. She stood in the middle of the square and breathed it in, and her hindbrain fired a single clear signal: apex predator. Threat. She was still parsing it when she heard rapid small footsteps. She turned. Tim was running across the square from the direction of Petra's door, 4 years old and entirely focused on the ball rolling ahead of him. "Tim," she called. "Tim, come here." He didn't hear her. The ball bounced. He chased it, and then he stopped. A wolf had stepped out of the alley, and the world seemed to contract around him. He was enormous, black-furred and massively built, his shoulder at the height of a man's chest. His green eyes swept the square with the rapid assessment of a creature operating on pure predatory instinct. She had felt alpha compulsion before, but this was different. It crashed against her chest and pressed down on her shoulders. Every instinct she had said, "Keep still. Keep your head down." Around the square, people screamed. 2 women near the well screamed and ran. A man shouted something and slammed a shutter. The few wolves in the settlement collapsed. She could see it, their bodies dropping to submissive crouches. She locked her knees and held. Because Tim was frozen in the center of the square, and when the wolf's lips began to pull back, he shrieked. The sound was small and high and terrified, and the wolf's entire body responded to it, every muscle coiling. From inside the trading post, Petra's voice erupted. "Tim!" Isoria was already moving. She crossed the space at a dead run, the compulsion hammering at her with every step, and shoved Tim behind her in one motion, planting herself between him and the wolf. "Behind me," she told Tim. "Don't move." The wolf stared at her. His eyes were green, vivid, burning green. His scent hit her fully, blood and wilderness and the cold mineral smell of deep forest. But underneath all of that, there was something else. A thread. Something familiar in a way that made no sense. It was like she'd smelled that wolf before, except she'd never seen him. The wolf took another step toward her. Behind her, Tim made a small sound. "Go," she said to him very quietly. "Walk. Do not run." She heard him go. She did not take her eyes off the wolf. "I see you," she said. He charged. Not a test. A full charge, and Isoria's body made a decision before her mind did. She shifted. Everything she wore exploded off her body, and she came up, bracing for impact. Then he hit her like a falling tree. The collision drove her back through the snow. She fought for purchase, snapping and snarling. But he was twice her size, and he had momentum, and he used it, getting his mass above hers. His jaws closed on her throat, and he bore down, and she was on her back in the snow with the sky above her, his full weight pinning her. The compulsion detonated at full contact. It crashed through her chest, pouring into every animal part of her. Submit. She fought it. His grip tightened in warning, teeth pressing harder against her jugular. One clean motion, and it was over. She lay beneath him in the snow and felt how completely the outcome of this rested not in her strength, but in whatever was left of him underneath the ferrule. Something else arrived, an instinct from deeper than strategy. She stopped fighting. All at once, completely. She went still, and she turned her head to the side and bared her throat. He stilled above her. The pressure of his jaw shifted. The teeth loosened. She lay completely motionless beneath him and let him read her. The wolf lifted his head. She shifted back. The cold arrived instantly. She was on her back in the snow, human, bare, and the winter was thorough. But she did not move. She looked up at him, the enormous dark wolf standing over her, his muzzle above her face, those green eyes on hers. Wild. Wrecked. "There's a human in there," she said. "Feel him." She reached up slowly. He didn't move. She pressed her palm flat against the side of his jaw. The fur was coarser than she expected, and he was fever-warm beneath it. She looked up into his eyes. The pull hit her then, low and certain, a current running beneath everything else, as though it had been there before she touched him and would be there after. Her breath had gone shallow. She was not cold anymore. "Come back," she said. "You're in there. I can feel it." She kept her palm against his jaw, kept her eyes on his. "Shift back." He stared at her. He didn't shift. She held on a moment longer before she understood. It wasn't refusal. He simply couldn't do it. She lowered her hand. His eyes stayed on her face as he moved, those burning green eyes. Then he turned, and in 4 massive, silent bounds he was gone. Isoria lay in the snow for a moment and looked at the empty square. Then the cold made itself comprehensively known, and she sat up. The square begun to refill cautiously, a door opening an inch. She stood up. She had nothing on. "He's gone," she said to the square at large. The trading post door flew open, and Petra came out at a dead run, blanket already open in both arms, and wrapped it around Isoria. "Inside," she said. "Now." Isoria went. The warmth of the trading post was almost an aggression. From the back room came Florey's voice, cheerful, imperious, mid-monologue. Isoria stood and listened to it and felt something in her chest loosen. Petra closed the door. She disappeared into the back and returned with a cup of something hot and a pile of clothes. Shirt, trousers, socks. Don't argue about the fit. Isoria dressed where she stood. "Your throat," Petra said. Isoria touched it. The warmth was still there. Not quite pain, not quite not pain. "Tell me about the wolf," she said. Petra told her. 6 months ago. He'd appeared from nowhere. No pack, no origin. Killed the 5 wolves who challenged him. Scattered an entire pack from the northern ridge. 2 parties of hunters had come for the wolf. The first returned shaken and silent. The second didn't return at all. Then, 2 months ago, royal messengers had posted a bounty. Alive, if possible. Dead, if necessary. "Royal?" Isoria asked. "Here, on free land?" "This land is only free because it's too harsh for His Majesty's kingdom to bother with," Petra said. Isoria thought about Florey, the embroidered cloth and the gold-edged crest, the pendant she'd now hidden under the floorboards. "The wolf is a shifter," she said. "He can't shift back." Petra looked at her carefully. "You put your hand on his face." Isoria said nothing. "He had you on your back in the snow by the throat. And then you shifted back to human, and you touched him." "I know what I did," Isoria said. "I'm asking," Petra said patiently, "if you know why." Isoria thought about green eyes, wild and burning and wrecked. "No," she said quietly. Chapter 6. A few days later, she opened the cabin door at dawn and nearly walked into the deer. She stopped with one hand on the doorframe. A full doe, laid on the flat stone outside. Fresh. Steam still rising from the body in the cold air. She'd been placed with the deliberateness of a gift. Her hand went to her knife. She scanned the tree line, slow and thorough. Nothing visible. She went still and listened past the wind. The forest was silent in the way that meant something large had passed through it very recently. She caught his trace on the cold air, blood and wilderness, and that dense, unmistakable alpha thread at her door. He had been here, while she slept. She stood with that for a moment. Then she dragged the deer inside, prepared it fast, and spent the rest of the day with the prickling sensation of being watched. The second kill came the following morning. A rabbit, on the stone. The morning after, a fox. Each one fresh, each one placed with intention, and each morning she stood in the doorway in the early dark and felt him out there and felt the hair rise on the back of her neck in a way that was not entirely fear. It was the not entirely that bothered her. She knew what fear felt like, but this was something with more complexity in it. She dreamed of him. She didn't realize it at first. She lay still before she understood why her pulse was elevated, why her skin felt the way it did after something had been watching her in the dark. She had been dreaming of the wolf, but not the fight. The moment after, the weight of him above her, the pull. Beside her, Florrie slept with one fist open near her chin. "I'm losing my mind," she told the ceiling. She checked the tree line every morning. She started doing it first thing. Some mornings the trace was hours old and fading. Some mornings it was fresh enough to tell her he had been at the edge of the tree line recently. Very recently. Those mornings her heart did something she did not discuss with herself. A week in, she started finding his tracks. She wasn't looking for them. She was checking the south snare line, Florrie strapped to her back, and she cut across his trail in the snow and stopped. It was the stride of something massive, circling the valley in a wide arc. She followed the arc with her eyes. He hadn't been passing through. He had been running the perimeter, a complete circuit. She crouched over the tracks and did the calculation and felt something move through her that was not comfortable. "How long have you been doing this?" she said to the empty air. On her back, Florrie made a grab for her braid. "He's been patrolling," Hisoria told her. "Every night, around us." She looked at the tree line, at the ordinary pine and shadow that gave nothing away. "I don't know if I should be afraid of that or not." Florrie ate her braid. "Helpful," Hisoria said. That night, she lay awake long after Florrie slept and listened to the dark outside the cabin walls with her wolf senses pushed to their limit, reading the sounds and the scent landscape of the valley. She dreamed of his warmth, the fever heat of him above her, the scent of him filling her lungs. She woke before dawn, breathing hard. She was being hunted. She understood this with increasing clarity. Not hunted the way prey was hunted with patience, with purpose, with the absolute certainty of something that had decided. The problem was what her body did with this information. She told herself she was responding to the alpha compulsion, that any wolf would feel this, that it was biological response to dominant signal. She told herself this in the mornings with considerable firmness and believed it less as the days went on. On the 14th morning, she felt him at the tree line, closer than he had been in daylight before. Much closer. She stood and did not speak. The cold air moved between them. She breathed him in, that signature, and underneath it the thread, and underneath the thread, almost. "Thank you," she said finally, quietly. He had stepped out of the shadows. Not fully, but visible, his black coat against the white and gray of the forest, those green eyes on her across the distance. Neither of them moved. Then he was gone, and she stood alone. That night, she lay on her back in the dark with her blood going and Florrie breathing slow and easy beside her, and stared at the ceiling and felt the pull in her chest. She was afraid. She was afraid, and she was something else entirely, and the something else was winning. Chapter 7. It happened because Hisoria made the mistake of turning her back for 30 seconds. She was banking the fire for the morning, and she heard the familiar sound of industrious crawling. Florrie had learned 3 weeks ago, and she thought nothing of it until she turned around and the cabin was empty. The door was open 3 inches. Hisoria came through the door and her heart stopped. Florrie was in the middle of the clearing, crawling through the spring-soft snow with focused determination toward the wolf. He was at the near edge of the clearing, turned toward the small moving thing approaching him. 12 feet between them. 10. Hisoria's knife was in her hand before she knew she'd reached for it. She moved fast and silent, calculating. Florrie stopped crawling. She sat back on her haunches in the snow and looked up at the wolf with the grave, considering expression she used when she was working something out. The wolf looked down at her. Then Florrie laughed. A full, delighted, completely uninhibited baby laugh. and she reached both arms up toward the wolf's face with the imperious confidence of someone who had never once been denied what she reached for. "Bah!" she announced. The wolf went absolutely still. Hisoria stopped too, frozen, because what happened next made no sense. His ears slowly flattened, not in aggression, but in something she had no frame for. His massive body lost its coiling. His head lowered, down and down, until his nose was level with Florey's outstretched hands. He inhaled. A long, slow, deep breath, drawing Florey's scent into himself. This was careful. This was a creature searching for something specific, something that changed the quality of his stillness entirely. Then the sound came, low and deep and wrenching up from somewhere in his chest. A sound she had never heard from him, from any wolf. A whine, broken and climbing. Raw in a way nothing about him had ever been raw before. Florey patted his nose with both hands, grabbed a fold of his lip, inspected it, said "bah" again, apparently in explanation. He held still. He held perfectly, tremblingly still, and let her, and Hisoria lowered her knife. His green eyes moved to hers. A question. "You won't hurt her," Hisoria said. "I know you won't." Florey immediately grabbed his ear and announced something at length. He closed his eyes. And then, standing this close to both of them, Hisoria caught it. Why his scent always seemed familiar. Why it had always reminded her of something. Or rather, someone. Her brow furrowed. She breathed again, slower, more deliberately. His bass note, the deepest part of his signature, and Florey's deepest note. The same. Not similar. The same root. The same specific piece of scent signature, present in both of them, the way it was present between bloodkin. She stood in the clearing and looked at Florey, who was now attempting to climb onto the wolf's nose. What are you to her? She thought. The air in the clearing changed. Hisoria felt it before she saw it. A subtle pressure shift, the particular charge that lived in the moment before a shift. She had never felt it come from a baby. "Florey!" she said, and took one step forward. Florey shifted. It was fast and small, and nothing like an adult shift, not the powerful, deliberate transformation of a wolf who knew what they were doing, but something instinctive. One moment there was a baby in the snow. The next, there was a wolf pup. Tiny. Extraordinarily tiny. A black pup, dark as ink, no bigger than a rabbit, sitting in the snow. She shook herself once, looked up. The wolf's eyes were open. He had lifted his head from his paws and was staring at the pup. He made the sound again, that low, broken, climbing whine from deep in his chest, but different this time, less wounded, more like something that had been locked in the dark for a very long time. The pup, Florey, wobbled on her 4 tiny legs and then lunged at him. She bounced off his nose, tumbled, righted herself with enormous dignity, and did it again. She was playing with the same whole-bodied joy she brought to everything, bouncing against the wolf's jaw and his enormous scarred face with tiny, delighted sounds. The wolf, very slowly, very carefully, began to play back. Small nudges. Barely anything. A gentle bump of his nose that sent the pup rolling and scrambling back to her feet. A paw, laid flat in the snow in front of her. The pup climbed it immediately, fell off the other side, and came tearing back around for another attempt. He licked her. One long, thorough, careful pass of his tongue that covered most of her small body and left her looking indignant, and then she was off again, launching herself at his ear. Hisoria sat down in the snow. She thought about early shifts. She had heard of them, rare enough to be considered almost mythological. Children manifesting months or years before they should, and every case had one thing in common: rupture. Separation from a parent. Trauma so specific it reached down into the blood and pulled the wolf up early. She looked at Florey, the tiny black pup currently attempting to fit the wolf's ear entirely in her mouth. She breathed them both in, again. His bass note and Florey's bass note. The same. She looked at Florey, dark hair when she was human, green eyes like his. She looked at the wolf. at the feral, wordless, broken creature who had appeared 6 months ago, same as Florrie. Isoria pressed her hand over her mouth. He was her father. This feral, wordless, suffering creature who could not shift back was Florrie's father. And Florrie had shifted because something in the blood had known it. He didn't know, not really. She could see that clearly, but something in him knew. Isoria sat in the snow for a long time and said nothing. Chapter 8. 3 weeks later, the wolf stopped sleeping by the hearth and started sleeping beside her. She told herself she would address this in the morning. She didn't. What she did instead was shift. She had shifted her whole life for hunting, for tracking, for warmth, but rarely for pleasure. Now she shifted in the mornings before the light came up and ran the valley in wolf form, and the first time he fell into stride beside her, she felt something click into place in her chest. This was what the pull had been reaching toward. In wolf form, there was no ambiguity, only the hum in her blood and the animal certainty of him beside her. At night, the ache of it was maddening. She lay in the dark and felt the pull drawn so tight it had become its own kind of noise, a constant vibration beneath her skin. He was feral. He could not shift back, could not speak, could not tell her his name. She did not know what had broken him or who he had been before. She turned over and he was awake, watching her in the dark. Those green eyes catching the faint glow of the banked fire, watching her. She held his gaze. The pull tightened. "I know," she said quietly. "I know. I feel it too." He didn't move. He waited with that absolute wolf patience. She reached out and pressed her palm against his side. He was fever warm, always fever warm. His eyes stayed on hers. "You can't shift back," she said. "You can't tell me your name." His eyes held hers, patient, certain, waiting. She looked at him, this ruined, feral, tender creature who had dragged elk through the snow for her and run circuits in the dark to keep them safe and submitted to a baby climbing on his face. She belonged to him. She had known it since the square. She lay back slowly, keeping her eyes on his, tilting her chin up deliberately, offering her throat. "Come on then," she whispered. He moved over her. The weight of him was enormous. The alpha compulsion moved through her in a wave, softer than it had been in the square. She felt her wolf self respond with a relief so profound it was almost dizzying. Yes. This. Finally. His nose moved along her throat, that slow, deliberate scenting. She closed her eyes. His breath was warm against her pulse point. She felt him pause there, teeth grazing the skin. A low sound moved through his chest, not the growl of warning, something else entirely, deep and resonant and reverent. She shifted. It happened between one breath and the next, her body moving into wolf form beneath him. Then he bit. One flare of bright, clean pain at the junction of her neck and shoulder, and then the bond snapped into place like a door thrown open onto light. She felt him, not his presence. She had felt his presence for months. This was him, the interior of him, the vast and lightless grief he had been living inside, old and total and so deep she nearly lost herself in it. The tenderness he showed Florrie, raw and bewildered and aching. A father's love operating without the knowledge that it was a father's love. And beneath everything, beneath the madness and the grief, something that made her cry out. A love so fierce and so certain it had survived the total destruction of his mind. He did not know his own name. He did not know hers, but he knew she was his with a certainty that lived below memory. She had never been known like this. She lay in wolf form with the bond singing in her blood and the mating mark burning warm at her shoulder. Chapter 9. Since the claiming, she had not been alone inside her own skin. There was a second heartbeat beneath her own, a warmth running through her chest that was not her warmth. She felt him the way she felt her own pulse, constantly, without having to try. She felt his protectiveness when Florrie cried in the night. She felt his contentment when the three of them were together in the clearing. She felt the grief, and sometimes, without warning, she felt something else. A flash, fragmentary, violent, gone before she could hold it. A woman's face, laughing, then blood, then screaming, then rage so total it obliterated everything else. But what came through most was the pull. It had always been there. She had felt it since the square, but mated, bonded, the mark warm at her shoulder where his teeth had been. The pull had become more. She was always aware of where he was. She reached for him without thinking, her hand finding his fur, her body orienting toward him the way a compass needle oriented north. He scent-marked her. The deliberate, thorough, repeated claiming of her scent with his nose along her jaw and her throat and her wrists. They slept pressed together, her back against his chest, Florrie in the next room. It was the pull that woke her, 3 weeks after the claiming. It had changed quality in the night. Something more urgent, more specific. She lay still for a moment, reading it, and realized what pressed against her back was skin. Bare, hot. The arm draped over her waist was not a paw. It was a hand. Large, long-fingered, scarred across the knuckles, shaking slightly where it pressed against her stomach. Isoria did not move for a minute. She lay absolutely still and felt her heart do something large, and only then did she turn over. Black hair, shoulder length, tangled and wild against the furs. A jaw that could have been carved rather than grown. Scars, everywhere, a map of them across his chest and arms. He was enormous even like this, broad-shouldered and heavily muscled in the way of someone built by real use rather than aspiration. And his eyes, green. The same green she had looked into 100 times, in every weather and every light. But now in a human face, framed by black lashes, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Hunger. Desperate, raw, overwhelmed hunger. Not the simple need of the wolf. This was deliberate, human. The look of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and was looking at it. At her. He reached up and touched her face, one hand cupping her jaw with a care so total she felt it move through the bond. Felt the echo of how this felt from his side. His thumb moved along her cheekbone, then lower, tracing the line of her jaw. The way he looked at her made her breath catch, made her acutely aware of the fact that she was pressed against the body of a man, and that neither of them were wearing anything. Through the bond she felt him. The ache of someone that had been a wolf for months and was now human and had a mate and knew what it needed with an urgency that bypassed all the higher functions. The bond thrummed with it with want and intention. Mine, it said. Finally mine. His mouth found hers, and she felt the kiss through 2 layers simultaneously. The physical reality of it and how she tasted to him. The specific, overwhelming reality of her after so long without touch. His tongue traced the seam of her lips and she opened for him and felt his groan vibrate through both their bodies. His hands moved, down her throat, across her collarbone, mapping the shape of her. She pulled back just far enough to speak. "I don't know your name," she said. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. His mouth opened. Nothing came. She put her hand against his jaw. "It doesn't matter," she said, her thumb tracing the line of his lower lip. "You are mine." His hands were everywhere, learning her, claiming her, thorough and possessive and devastatingly certain. And through the bond she felt his satisfaction every time she gasped. She felt his need like a tide coming in, relentless and inevitable, and her own need rising to meet it. She let the tide in. What passed between them in the dark cabin, Florrie asleep in the next room and the fire burning low, was not something she had language for after. He was thorough and she was relentless, and the pleasure built between them, inevitable and consuming. The bond sang. There was no other word for what it did. It sang between them, bright and sure. Dawn came pale through the frost-edged window. They slept. And when Isoria woke up next, it was to a sense of wrongness and the knowledge that a stranger had gotten inside their den, and was currently standing over her mate. Chapter 10. The man was pressing a cloth to her mate's face. Isoria hit him with her full weight, dagger first before the thought fully formed. They crashed to the floor together. He intercepted her knife hand, fast and trained, but she fought him with everything she had in her thin nightgown on the cabin floor. "What did you do?" She got her dagger back at his throat. "What did you do to him?" The man went still beneath her. "He isn't hurt," he began. "What did you give him?" The blade pressed harder. "It isn't poison," the man swore. "He is only asleep, I promise you." She looked at her mate. His face was slack against the furs, chest rising and falling too slowly, too deeply. A stranger had been at his face and he had not stirred. Furious, she drove her elbow into the back of the man's skull, then crossed to the window. The valley was full of soldiers, 40, maybe more, moving through the tree line in tight formation. And banners. She looked at the banners and something snagged in her memory. That crest, she knew it. She went back to her mate. "Wake up." She grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "I need you to wake up right now." His eyes opened, glassy and unfocused, and she felt him through the bond, fighting upward. His lips moved. Nothing came out. Then he sank again, and the green disappeared, and the bond went quiet. She held his face between her hands. It was the first time she had seen him in full daylight in human form. The sharp jaw, the black hair against the furs, the scars across his chest and shoulders. He was so beautiful, but his eyes were glassy and gone, and there was an army outside. 3 sharp knocks at the door. She looked at the back room where Flory still slept. She could take Flory and run, but she could not carry him. She ground her teeth until her jaw ached. "We come in peace," a man's voice, calm and carrying. She closed her eyes, opened them. She moved to the door and opened it slowly, 6 inches, and stepped behind it. She let the man step through. Then she came and put her dagger to his throat. "Don't move," she called past him to the soldiers outside, "or I kill him." The man at her blade was completely still. "They won't care, lady," he said. "I'm not important." "Who are you?" she asked. "Renard, captain of the guards of His Majesty's army." "His Majesty," Isoria repeated. "The Alpha King," Renard said. "Arkeen Shadecrest." Isoria stared at him. "What does the king want with us?" She felt it before she saw it. Another presence, heavy and alpha, filling the doorway. She looked up. The man in the doorway was dressed in regal attire, and he carried himself with the weight of someone who had never once needed to announce his authority. Dark hair, green eyes, perhaps a little younger, a little less weathered. But the jaw was the same and the eyes were the same, and he looked just like... "Riven!" The man gasped. He moved past her, past the knife, past Renard, and rushed to the bed and looked down at her mate with an expression of shock and sorrow. "Don't touch him!" Isoria was between them in an instant, dagger up. The man turned to her. "I wouldn't hurt my brother," he said. She looked at them both, the sleeping face and the waking one, and saw it. "You sent men after him," she said. "Told them to bring him back dead or alive. Forgive me if I don't melt at your supposed fraternal bond." The man raised an eyebrow. "And who are you?" Isoria lifted her chin. "His mate." The king looked at her, a long, cold look, top to bottom. "His mate is dead," he said. "Hence why he is here." His gaze moved over her. The nightgown, the rough cabin walls, the hunting knife in her hand. His mate was a princess, a queen, someone worthy of his rank. He paused, then sneered. "You're not even fit to be his whore." Isoria bared her teeth at him. From the back room, a piercing scream. The king's head turned sharply. "You have a child here?" he asked. He moved. Isoria moved first, jumping between him and the back room door, dagger in his face. "Don't even think about it!" "Captain," the king said. Renard moved to get past her. Isoria shifted to block him. The back room door pushed open. A small black wolf pup wobbled through it on unsteady legs, whining, and pressed herself trembling against Isoria's leg. Both men froze. Their faces came apart at exactly the same moment. Renard went white. The king's composure cracked open, All of it gone. The cold authority, the dismissal. Something raw and stunned in its place. "Who?" the king murmured. Isoria scooped Flori up and pressed her to her chest. The pup curled against her, still shaking. The king was staring at Flori. His nostrils flared. "She's Riven's," he said. "I can smell him on her." Isoria said nothing. It was plain as daylight, the scent signature clear and undeniable. And the king shared it, she realized. The same bass note. The same as her mate. The same as Flori. "She's not just His Majesty's child," Renart said. The king went very still. "Don't you recognize that scent?" Renart pressed quietly. "She is Her Majesty's daughter. She's Alicia's." The king closed his eyes as though something had struck him. "No." He shook his head. "The baby was dead. Killed with her mother. You saw it. Riven saw it. That's why he..." He turned and looked at his brother on the bed. Didn't finish. "Unless," Renart said slowly, "unless there was another." The king gasped. He turned back to Flori and reached toward her, one hand extended. Isoria stepped back, baring her teeth, but Flori had gone still in her arms, watching the king with those grave green eyes, not reaching for him but not afraid either. After a moment, she shifted back to human, a small, dark-haired girl blinking in the morning light. "A twin?" Arkeen whispered. He looked at Flori's face and something in him broke open quietly. "She even looks like Alicia," he murmured, moved. "Hold on," Isoria said. She went to the loose floorboard in the corner, Flori still on her hip, and pried it up and found the pendant. She crossed back and held it out to the king. Arkeen took it, stared at it. "This was on her when I found her," Isoria said. "The woman with her was dead. Had run until she had nothing left." She paused. "Was that your queen?" The king shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Alicia was killed in the palace. She and the child she was carrying, while she was giving birth." His voice was controlled and flat, and the grief ran under it like a river under ice. "Our uncle, Valdis. He orchestrated it. He wanted the throne. He needed the line of succession broken, Riven destabilized. He didn't know she was carrying twins. No one did." Isoria stared at him, horrified. "I was with Riven when he found them," the king went on. He looked at his brother on the bed, and his scent went heartbroken and horrified. He shifted. He killed Valdis in seconds. His guards, everyone who stood in his way. He shook his head. "He went mad with grief and he disappeared, and I have been looking for him since. I did not think I would ever see him human again." He paused. The shock of it, his mate's death, his pup's death, it destroyed him. The cabin was very quiet. "He is the true ruler," Arkeen said. He straightened. "Riven Shadecrest, the true Alpha King." He looked at Flori in Isoria's arms. "Which makes her his heir, our princess." A pause. "And future queen." Isoria held Flori tighter. "Your Majesty," Renart said. "If a child survived, and Riven is human again." He looked at Isoria. "It's thanks to her." The king turned to her. He looked at her for a long moment, differently than before. "You really are my brother's mate?" he asked. Isoria hesitated. Then she shifted Flori to one hip and pulled the neck of her nightgown aside, exposing the mating mark at her shoulder. Renart exhaled. "A fated bond," he said quietly. "Only a fated mate would bring Riven back." "He isn't fully back," Isoria said. She stopped, looked at her mate, thought about the flashes she had felt through the bond. The woman laughing, the blood, the scream, the wall he built every time it got close. Whenever the memories come back, he can't take it. He stays somewhere else, where it can't reach him. She understood it fully, saying it out loud. He had been suppressing it all along. Staying wolf because the wolf couldn't remember, because the wolf could bear what the man could not. She held Flori tighter and said nothing else. "A nursemaid must have seen what was happening," the king said, "and fled with the princess." "Not a nursemaid," Renart said. His voice had changed, quieter. "The midwife, Sora." The king looked at him. "Renart," he briefly inclined his head. I'm sorry for your loss. Renart nodded once, meeting Isoria's gaze. My wife, Renart said. She disappeared that night. I never knew. He stopped. She loved Her Majesty. She must have delivered the first baby. And when Valdis came, she hid her. And she ran. She ran as far as she could, Isoria said. She kept her voice clear, because he deserved to hear every word of it clearly. She tried to reach the Freelands, but it's harsh here. Help is never free, and the winter was brutal. She died spending the last of everything she had trying to keep Flori warm. She looked at him steadily. Your wife saved her. I owe her everything. She bowed to him. Renart was very still for a moment. Then, Flori? That's what I named her. When I found her. Isoria looked down at the small, dark-haired girl in her arms. She was a few weeks old. There was a winter flower growing from the rock beside her. I called her Flori. Renart nodded. His jaw was tight. He did not trust his voice, she thought. The king had been watching her. He looked at his brother on the bed, at Flori in her arms. He crossed to her, and he went to one knee. What you have done, Arkeen said. For my niece, for my brother. He looked up at her. I and the entire kingdom owe you everything. Epilogue. These days, Riven was human more often than not. Some mornings she woke and found him human beside her, his arm heavy across her waist, his breath warm at her neck. But other mornings she woke alone and found him curled outside the cabin door. Those were good mornings, too. She had stopped ranking them. He was getting better. Slowly, and not in a straight line. Sometimes a day where the grief came up and swallowed him whole. Once, surfacing from one of those days, he had looked at her and said, his voice still rough, I am half of who I was. She had taken his face between her hands. I love you anyway. He had pressed his forehead to hers, and through the bond she felt everything he couldn't say yet, a love vast and absolute and without edges. What helped him most was Flori. Flori, who was walking now and had developed the habit of shifting mid-stride so that a toddling small girl became a scrambling black pup between one step and the next. Flori, who had discovered that her father in wolf form was the superior climbing apparatus and used him accordingly, hauling herself up his flank with her fists in his fur. He could not always remember everything, but he always felt their bond, and he always knew Flori. Arkeen came when he could. The early visits had been hard, Riven going still and low, the growl in his chest. But Arkeen was patient, and now Riven would sit near him, would let him put a hand briefly on his shoulder. Come home, Arkeen told her quietly on the last visit. Riven is our king, which makes you our queen. He cannot be your king again, she'd replied. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Arkeen nodded. He had known. She had agreed to the tutors, though, a woman who came twice a week to teach Flori the things a princess needed to know. Flori submitted to these lessons with focused seriousness and then went directly to her father afterwards and reported everything. He listened to every word. On some afternoons, Arkeen's children came, 3 of them, loud and joyful. The clearing would fill with noise and small wolves, and Isoria would look up and find Riven watching them all with a smile on his face. She didn't know what the future held, but she had stopped needing to know. What she did know was her own body, and what it had been telling her for 3 weeks now. The new scent she carried. Riven had noticed before she'd said a word. One morning he had gone very still, pressed his face to her stomach, and stayed there. Through the bond she had felt him, disbelief, and then joy so big it had nowhere to go. A child. Theirs. That evening he pulled her into his lap, fully human and entirely hers, his green eyes on her face with that look she had never found a word for. She let him lay her down in the firelight. Let him have her the way he needed to, slow and thorough. And afterward, she lay against his chest and he pressed his lips to her hair and finally said it. I love you. She smiled against his skin. Outside the cabin, the valley was quiet, and Flori slept, and their child grew, and his arms were around her. It was enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Before you go, I've just released a brand new exclusive story on my Patreon, available for purchase. One Nightstand with the Alpha King follows Tasha, who spends a passionate night with the king she's loved for years, only to wake up and discover he doesn't remember her at all, and is about to marry a princess to secure a fragile peace treaty. When Tasha discovers she's pregnant, the princess's older brother steps in with a chilling condition. She must never tell the king about the child. If you'd like to discover the story, you'll find the link in the description below. Lily.